You can feel perfectly healthy today and still carry a hidden blockage that ends your life without a single warning. You can run 5 miles before sunrise. You can feel strong, disciplined, and completely in control of your body. You can pass every routine checkup, hear the words, "Everything looks normal," and walk out of the clinic feeling reassured. And still have a silent blockage growing inside your heart, one that could stop your life without warning. The first time I truly understood that, it unsettled me in a way few medical facts ever have. Because like most people, I carried a quiet belief that fitness was protection, that effort created safety, that if you respected your body would respect you back. But biology doesn't make deals. Biology adapts. And sometimes, it adapts so well that it hides danger until the very last moment. I remember reading about a man who collapsed near the finish line of a race he had trained months for. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't sedentary. He wasn't someone you would look at and think, "I risk." He was the kind of person we point to as proof that discipline works. What stayed with me wasn't just that he died. It was that he felt perfectly fine minutes before it happened. No dramatic pain. No obvious warning. Just a sudden stop. That realization forced me to ask a question that felt almost uncomfortable to confront. How can a healthy heart fail so completely, so suddenly, without sending a clear signal first? To answer that, we have to look beyond the idea of strength and start looking at the heart as what it truly is. A muscle that never rests, never pauses, and demands an enormous supply of oxygen every second of your life. And that supply depends on a small network of arteries wrapped tightly around the heart, feeding it beat after beat. Among them is one vessel doctors speak about with unusual seriousness, the left anterior descending artery. In emergency rooms, it carries a nickname that sounds almost harsh. They call it the Widowmaker. Not because it fails often, but because when it fails fast. And what continues to haunt me is not how deadly that blockage can be, it's how quietly it can grow year after year, while you feel completely healthy. That is the mystery we need to unravel. That mystery led me somewhere unexpected, not to the outside of the artery, but deep into its inner wall, where the real story quietly begins. I used to imagine heart disease as something obvious. A pipe slowly clogging, a passage narrowing until blood simply couldn't get through anymore. It felt logical, predictable, almost mechanical. If the opening became smaller, symptoms would appear. You would feel it happening. Your body would warn you. But the more I learned, the more I realized how wrong that picture was. A healthy artery is not a rigid tube. It's alive, flexible, responsive. The inner lining, called the tunica intima, is remarkably smooth, designed to let blood glide through with minimal resistance. Under normal conditions, it's one of the most efficient surfaces in the human body. The problem is that life places constant stress on that surface. Not all at once, and not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, over years. Blood pressure pushes against the walls thousands of times a day. Elevated sugar levels trigger subtle inflammation. Tiny particles carried in the bloodstream brush against the lining again and again. Each force on its own seems harmless. But together, over decades, they create microscopic injuries. Scratches so small you would never feel them. Damage so minor no test would immediately detect it. And when those tiny injuries appear, the body does what it was designed to do. It repairs them. Cholesterol moves toward the damaged area, almost like a patch applied to protect a weak spot. Immune cells follow, trying to stabilize the surface. At first, this response is protective. It's the body's attempt to maintain order. But over time, the repair process becomes excessive. The patch thickens. The area hardens. Layers accumulate inside the wall itself. What forms is not a simple blockage, but a structure, a mixture of cholesterol, calcium, and cellular debris embedded within the artery. This is atherosclerosis. What unsettled me most was not the existence of plaque, but the way the artery responds to it. Instead of squeezing inward and restricting blood flow, the vessel often stretches outward, quietly making space for the growing mass. Blood continues to move normally. Oxygen continues to reach the heart. Daily life feels unchanged. You can walk, work, exercise, even feel stronger than ever, all while instability is slowly developing beneath the surface. That realization forced me to rethink something fundamental. Sometimes the absence of symptoms doesn't mean the absence of disease. Sometimes it means the body is adapting so successfully that it keeps the danger hidden. And that raises a question that stayed with me long after I understood the mechanism. If plaque can grow silently for years without causing pain, what is the exact moment when everything suddenly falls apart? That question kept circling in my mind, not how plaque grows, but what precise moment turns a silent condition into a sudden emergency. The answer, I discovered, has less to do with size and more to do with stability. At first, that idea felt counterintuitive. We tend to fear big problems. Large tumors. Major blockages. Obvious damage. But inside the arteries, danger often hides in structures that look small, soft, and fragile. I started to picture plaque not as a solid mass, but as something more delicate, almost like a blister forming beneath the skin. As long as the thin layer covering that blister stays intact, everything appears stable. You might not even know it's there. But if that fragile surface tears, the situation changes instantly. Inside a coronary artery, a similar event can occur. Certain plaques are filled with inflammatory material and covered by a thin protective cap. For years, they may sit quietly, causing no noticeable disruption. Blood continues to flow. The heart keeps beating. Life feels normal. Then one day, under the right conditions, that cap ruptures. Sometimes, the trigger is sudden physical exertion. Sometimes it's a surge in blood pressure. Sometimes it's intense emotional stress. And sometimes, there is no clear trigger at all. When the rupture happens, the contents of the plaque spill into the bloodstream. To the body, this looks like a dangerous injury, an open wound inside a vessel. And the body's response is immediate and automatic. Platelets rush to the area. Clotting begins within seconds. What was once a stable surface becomes a rapidly forming obstruction. This is the moment everything changes. The heart attack doesn't build slowly in that instant. It happens abruptly, as the clot expands and blocks the artery like a cork sealing the neck of a bottle. Blood flow stops. Oxygen delivery stops. And the heart muscle, which depends on a constant supply of oxygen, begins to struggle almost immediately. What unsettled me most when I learned this was a simple statistic. Many heart attacks occur in arteries that are not severely narrowed. The vessel may still be partially open. Circulation may appear adequate. Yet the instability hidden inside the wall can create a sudden catastrophe. That realization forced me to reconsider what risk truly means. It's not always the biggest blockage that threatens life. Sometimes it's the most fragile one. And once blood flow is interrupted, the timeline becomes brutally short, because heart muscle is remarkably strong, but it is also remarkably vulnerable when deprived of oxygen. And yet, the more I studied these events, the more I realized something even more unsettling. Sometimes blood flow doesn't stop completely, and the heart can still be in danger. That idea confused me at first. If an artery isn't fully blocked, if blood is still moving, then why would the heart muscle begin to fail? It seemed to challenge everything I thought I understood about circulation. But biology often operates on balance, not absolutes, and the heart is no exception. What matters is not just whether blood is flowing, but whether the supply of oxygen can keep up with the heart's demand. I remember coming across the story of a man in his early 50s, disciplined, consistent, the kind of person who rarely missed a workout. He wasn't reckless with his health. He paid attention to his body. During a race, he noticed something subtle, almost easy to dismiss. His energy faded faster than usual. He felt slightly dizzy. A wave of nausea passed through him. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that sounded like the classic image of a heart attack. He assumed he was dehydrated. But at the hospital, doctors found a clue hidden in his blood, a protein called troponin. It's normally locked inside heart muscle cells, invisible to routine testing. But when those cells are injured, the protein leaks into the bloodstream, quietly signaling that damage has occurred. What surprised everyone was what they didn't find. His artery wasn't completely blocked. In fact, it was only partially narrowed, enough to restrict flow under stress, but not enough to stop it at rest. Under normal conditions, his heart could function without obvious problems. But during intense exertion, his heart rate climbed rapidly, and the muscle demanded more oxygen than the artery could deliver. Supply fell behind demand. There was another factor at play, a rhythm disturbance known as atrial fibrillation. Instead of beating in a steady, coordinated pattern, the heart was racing irregularly, leaving less time for each chamber to fill with blood. The muscle was working harder, beating faster, and receiving less oxygen at the same time. That combination can quietly push the heart into crisis. What stayed with me most was how easily the warning signs could be overlooked. Fatigue, lightheadedness, nausea. These symptoms don't always feel urgent. They don't always match the dramatic scenes we see in movies. But in the right circumstances, they can signal that the heart is under stress long before a complete blockage ever occurs. And that realization led me to another important insight. The body often compensates far longer than we expect, until the moment it can't anymore. And once I understood how long the body can compensate, another thought began to take shape. Maybe survival doesn't depend only on strength, but on time. The heart, it turns out, has a quiet backup system. When an artery slowly becomes narrowed over many years, the body doesn't simply surrender. Instead, it begins building new pathways, tiny vessels that connect neighboring arteries, creating alternate routes for blood to travel. These are called collateral vessels, and I find the idea almost humbling. The body is constantly preparing for problems we don't even know exist. I like to picture it as traffic rerouting itself long before a highway fully closes. If the blockage develops gradually, those side streets have time to form. They don't eliminate danger, but they can delay disaster. They can buy minutes. And in the world of heart muscle, minutes matter more than almost anything. There's a phrase physicians repeat in emergency rooms: time is muscle. The longer the heart is deprived of oxygen, the more tissue is permanently lost. What begins as a reversible injury can quickly become irreversible damage. That realization changed the way I think about prevention. For a long time, I assumed feeling well was enough evidence that everything inside me was working properly. But the more I learned, the clearer it became that health is not something you guess, it's something you measure. Modern medicine has given us tools that can reveal hidden risk long before symptoms appear. Not to create fear, but to create awareness. Because in many cases, the greatest tragedy is not weakness. It's simply not knowing. What stayed with me after learning all of this is a quiet but powerful truth. The most dangerous problems in the human body are often the ones we cannot feel. The heart is incredibly resilient, constantly adapting, compensating, and working in silence to keep us alive. But resilience is not the same as invincibility. Strength does not guarantee safety. Real protection comes from awareness, from understanding how our bodies work and taking responsibility before a crisis forces us to react. In the end, health is not about guessing. It's about knowing early enough to change the outcome. The deeper lesson here is simple, but not always comfortable. Do not wait for symptoms to tell you something is wrong. In daily life, this means paying attention to long-term habits, controlling blood pressure, staying physically active, managing stress, and scheduling appropriate health checks instead of assuming everything is fine because you feel fine. Small, consistent actions today can quietly protect the years ahead of you. Now I'm curious about your perspective. Have you ever assumed you were healthy simply because you felt normal? If you're comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your experience and see how different people approach their health. And if this kind of science-based storytelling helps you understand your body in a clearer way, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support truly motivates us to keep creating meaningful content like this in the future.